At one time, Spain held the world in its hands. In the 16th century, the empire on which the sun never sets wasn't Britain, that banner belonged to the Spaniards. For the first time in history, a single power commanded a global reach stretching from Europe to Africa, and from the Americas to Asia. But here is the irony: the richest empire the world had ever seen collapsed under the very weight of its own treasure. Why does this story still matter today? Because, much like Spain, we often mistake a sudden influx of money for real wealth. And when that inevitable crash arrives, the impact is brutal. When Spain stepped into the New World after 1492, they hit what looked like an endless jackpot. Gold and silver in quantities beyond any European's imagination poured into the Spanish treasury. With the conquest of Mexico in 1521, the Aztec Empire fell, opening the gates to the rich mines of Zacatecas. A decade later, the conquest of Peru shattered the Inca Empire and unlocked the legendary mountain of silver at Potosí. They called it the mountain that eats men, because extracting that silver cost the lives of thousands of miners. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain imported an estimated 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold. To put that in perspective, that was more silver than all of Europe had mined in the previous 1,000 years combined. This treasure didn't just change Europe, it reshaped the entire world. From Seville and Cadiz, Spanish ships carried these minerals east to the Mediterranean, north to the Low Countries, and west across the Pacific to Manila. Silver was traded for Chinese silk and porcelain. The first truly global economy was born, and Spain sat right at the center of it. For Americans today, this comparison is shocking. When Jamestown, the first permanent English colony, was founded in 1607, it was a struggling swamp. Meanwhile, Mexico City already boasted universities, printing presses, and massive cathedrals. Lima was a thriving metropolis. Spain was building global infrastructure while its rivals were still fumbling. Yet, in the midst of these rivers of silver, the empire was hollow at its core. Spain's fatal mistake was confusing treasure with wealth. The silver was real, but the way they used it turned their strength into a weakness. Prices in Spain exploded. Between 1500 and 1600, a phenomenon known as the price revolution occurred. Prices quadrupled in a single century. The country sat on mountains of silver, but ordinary people could no longer afford a loaf of bread. Why? Because money only holds value when it is scarce enough to be trusted. When the market is flooded with silver, the purchasing power of money collapses. The bread was the same, the baker was the same, but because people had too many coins, the prices soared. This silver wasn't a blessing, it became a virus poisoning the economy. The elites and bankers profited because they handled the money first, but the common people on fixed incomes were left behind. The mistakes didn't stop there. Instead of investing in productive industries, Spain spent its fortune on imports. Italian merchants, Dutch traders, and German craftsmen grew rich selling luxuries to Spain, paid for with American silver. Spain's own domestic industries withered away. Why build factories or trade networks when you could simply wait for the next treasure fleet? Spain became a massive consumer rather than a producer. Meanwhile, its rivals reinvested every cent they earned from Spain back into their own growth. Spanish monarchs burned staggering amounts of money on battlefields. Their mission to be the defenders of Catholic orthodoxy carried an astronomical price tag. Silver from Mexico and Peru funded wars against the Ottomans, the suppression of the Dutch revolt, and religious wars in France. Even the famous Spanish Armada of 1588, sent to crush England, was fueled by New World silver. When the Armada failed, the financial shock was devastating. Spain wasn't just spending the silver it had, it was borrowing against treasure that hadn't even arrived yet. German and Italian banking families advanced massive loans to the crown, secured by future silver shipments. It was brilliant in theory, but suicidal in practice. If a fleet was delayed by a storm or intercepted by pirates, Spain defaulted. And default they did, 4 times in the 16th century alone: 1557, 1575, 1596, and 1607. Imagine being the richest empire on earth and declaring bankruptcy every 20 years. This is where the pirates entered the stage. They weren't just random marauders, they were weapons of economic warfare. England and the Netherlands realized that if you struck the treasure fleets, you didn't just steal silver, you collapsed Spain's credit. When figures like Francis Drake plundered galleons and returned with treasure worth half of England's annual revenue, it was a hammer blow to the Spanish economy. In 1628, the Dutch privateer Piet Hein captured an entire treasure fleet off Cuba, nearly bankrupting the Spanish financial system in one go. Spain's lifeline had become its Achilles heel. The English, Dutch, and French studied Spain's decline and learned a vital lesson: an empire cannot be built on minerals alone. The Spanish model, based on extraction, plunder, and treasure fleets. Colonies existed only to funnel money to the center. The English/Dutch model, they built systems that created value. North America had no gold, but it had tobacco, sugar, timber, and cotton. These fueled industry. They founded stock exchanges, banks, and joint stock companies. Spain measured wealth in silver, its rivals measured wealth in systems. Silver runs out, but a system replicates itself. By the mid-1600s, Spain still looked massive on a map, but the inside was empty. Inflation had devoured prosperity, debt had shackled the crown to foreign bankers, and piracy had turned their greatest asset into their greatest liability. The story of Spain is the ultimate example of how money can rot the foundations of a society. Today, the situation isn't much different. As governments print money, inflation erodes the value of wages. Modern economies are built on too big to fail banks and fragile debt markets. Much like Spain was dependent on its silver fleets, Spain believed that owning half the world and endless silver meant eternal power. They were wrong. Real power isn't in the treasury, it is in the production and discipline that turn that treasure into lasting value. History doesn't repeat, but it certainly rhymes. The question is, will we recognize the warning in time?